your business philosophies, your practices, your principles. Those things are invaluable. Those are the things that allowed the son of a slave to put together a respect in a community, to build a church that still stands today, to have towers and things named after him in his honor after he's gone. And those things are also supposed to be conveyed to his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. So now we have a chance to compare some of our things through history. One of those things that we can look at is what we call today the Bible, right? And some of us are much more familiar with the Old Testament of the Bible, and also known as the Torah. But when you look at the Torah, what you have in the Torah is ultimately, in one description, a series of legacy statements. It's a compilation of the legacy statements of the line of Abraham. And it's very cool because it's really one family's progeny in writing. They talk about raising sheep and how you make 6 sheep into 6,000 sheep and the process that you go through to do it, so that now you know how to raise sheep and make money if you're a sheep raiser person. I think that's a shepherd. So that's what a legacy statement is, and it deals with your intangible assets, and the legacy planning process starts to bring your intangibles together. So also, not to belabor the legacy planning point, but it's an important element to it. There's a psychologist named Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson, he put together a more elaborate theory of development. He was a developmental psychologist. So if you're familiar with Freud and the id and the ego and his phases of development of the human psyche, Erikson went way beyond where Freud did and examined it to a point far beyond where Freud was able to reach. He built on Freud's principles and went and created 8 steps or 8 phases to development. The 7th was one that he coined generativity v. stagnation. Just so you guys have an idea who Erikson is, if you're not familiar, if you've ever heard the term identity crisis, that's one of the other things that he kind of invented in his research and that he formulated was the identity crisis. That's an Erikson invention. So this thing, generativity, is another Erikson invention. And what generativity is generativity is any tangible thing that one person might leave that has an existence beyond their actual lifetime here on Earth, but that is specifically directed towards the guidance or the development of the next generation. So it's a tangible thing that you leave, a writing, a voicemail. I don't know how a voicemail might not be the right example, but you know, your writings, your art, your instructions, your legacy statements. Those are your children. There's actually 4 different types that Erikson said. He said there was biological, which is the process of making a child. There's parental, which is the process of raising a child, because there are 2 different things if you think about them. Then there's technical, which is writing something, painting something, leaving something. He called that technical. And then there's societal. And very few people have the platform to have societal generativity. But some of the examples that come to mind and that are used in the writings are Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, perhaps someone might say a Barack Obama. They have societal impacts, and Oprah Winfrey, people that can impact society. So that's the generativity concept. And when you take that and you match that with the legacy planning and the estate planning, now you take your intangible assets and you put a structure to them that matches up the structure and the plan that you have for your tangible assets. But then we step back again and I share an adage with you. Have you ever heard the adage, if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, as opposed to giving him a fish and feeding him for a day? Now let's look at legacy and estate planning. Estate planning is simply giving a man a fish, because you give him your house, you give him the proceeds of your 401k, you give him whatever you have, you give your tangible assets away. But what you don't do is you don't give them the abilities to build those things themselves, to safeguard them, to keep them, to make them grow and prosper. They might have gotten it, but you might, like Derek Thomas, who was the client that I was talking about earlier, get taken away prematurely and not have an opportunity to show them everything that you know or that you plan to give them. But this is a process, and that's where Tim and I came together, and Tim was introduced to me in this very, seemingly miraculous way. It was perfect. It was like right when I was ready to do something, and this guy came and he said, hey, you need to meet this guy, and this guy ended up being Tim, and Tim is a writing coach, and I'm like, wow, a writing coach? I want to write a book about writing, so writing coaches are great for that. And then he turns out to have published this book called Letters to My Sons. And what's Letters to My Sons about? Well, it's all these things that I wrote in these 26 letters to my sons about my thoughts and my feelings and my life and my experiences. And I'm like, that's a legacy statement. That's what my book is going to be about. So you've published a book that's actually a legacy statement. And that just happened at a networking event that I was at in Atlanta. And now I have Tim, who's now my co-author, and who I will introduce and allow to say a few words to you briefly about our experience in the whole legacy planning process.
It really is an honor to work with Don and to see what he has come up with the personal legacy statements and all the writing he had done. I had an interesting experience to be 30 years ago in terms of legacies and statements and family history. I happened to live in Ghana, West Africa at the time, and I was over there working with the church to create an educational program for them. And I was often invited to go to the wake keepings, the funerals of the people who would die in the villages or in various churches. And one of the things I noticed was sometime during the time the family gathered and would be eating after the funeral and the burial, I would look off to the side and there would be all the men talking. About the third time I saw this, I finally approached one of my colleagues and I said, help me understand. There's something going on here and I have no idea what it is. And they explained to me that it was called going to the eights. And it was a process that began way back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, when the Africans themselves were enslaving each other. And that it intensified when the whites would come in, the Europeans, the Americans, and enslave the Africans. And what it was, when the families gathered for a funeral, the men would go off and they would talk and they would say,